Okay, thanks for joining me. I'm Katy Wallace. I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor, and today I'm talking about nutrition tips for reducing inflammation. This talk is for health education purposes only and should not take the place of medical advice. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please put them in the chat. We'll have time for questions at the end. So I want to start by talking about what is the definition of inflammation. So inflammation is a very natural thing. It's part of the body's defense mechanism. It's the process by which our immune system will recognize and remove something that's harmful. So you can think of like a virus as an example, and it begins to stimulate the body to eliminate that and to heal. But the problem is that that inflammation, which we typically view as an acute response, like an acute response to a difficult workout or an acute response to a bacteria or a virus, can sometimes take on a life of its own and become chronic. And so the things I'm talking about today are strategies that you can use to reduce inflammation that is chronic in your body. So there are 5 general signs of inflammation. They include redness, swelling, heat, pain, and in combination with those, usually with swelling and pain especially, there can be loss of function. So loss of function in a part of the body or some similar body system. So basically, acute inflammation becomes chronic if the body's immune response doesn't stop when it should. So if you injure yourself doing some gardening, you might have acute inflammation for a day or two, but if your body is healthy, you would go back to a normal baseline. But if there are things present or things that aren't present that you need, you might not go back to the normal baseline, and that injury you got from gardening might develop into something else. The same could be true for an acute viral infection. You might get a cold or a virus, but then it can become something much more in depth, such as long COVID. So chronic inflammation in those scenarios occurs because the body keeps sending out the inflammatory messages, the inflammatory chemicals and substances, even though there might not really be an acute infection or an injury there anymore. So there are some other things to think about. If you don't eliminate the original trigger that brought on the immune response, then you could have chronic inflammation. So that would be like if you were exposed to some microbe and it never really got dealt with, that could cause chronic infection or chronic inflammation for someone. Another example might be if you are becoming sensitive to a food like gluten and you keep eating that food, even though it's creating an immune response in the body. That's the type of thing that could create chronic infection, chronic inflammation, sorry, and a lot of downstream consequences. You could also think of chronic inflammation as being triggered by other things. It could be triggered by a low-level irritant like an allergen, like if you're allergic to pine pollen, or a chemical, such as something in a detergent that your body is aggravated by. And eventually, if this goes on, the body begins to lose tolerance. The immune system loses tolerance. It uses the ability to differentiate what's something harmless that you've encountered and what's something that's more dangerous. And then you can kind of have a breakdown of the immune system, and that can lead to chronic disease and autoimmune conditions.